Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ili with the SCSP. Thank you so much for joining us again for another tremendous conversation on this stage. It's really an honor and a pleasure to welcome to the SCSP for the second time during his tenure as Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, Mr. Jake Sullivan. He'll be having a moderated conversation with Dan again from Foreign Affairs. But before I bring them to speak to the podium, I want to thank Tarun and Chris McGuire on your team, Jake, because you have a tremendous team on emerging tech, and they've been a tremendous partner to us. So please join in.
Thank you. All right, good afternoon, all. I'm Dan Kurtz-Phelan. I'm the editor of Foreign Affairs Magazine. Thrilled to be here with Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, as I think everyone knows. In addition to overseeing the full suite of national security crises and foreign policy challenges, Jake is also, I think it's safe to say, one of the people in the national security community who thinks most deeply about the set of issues that are the focus of this expo. So, Jake, thanks for doing this and for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
So I have to start with one of those crises that is not related to technology that I think is front of mind for people, which is, of course, Gaza. There have been conflicting reports about the state of ceasefire negotiations and what happens. What can you tell us about the status of those talks? And then if you are able to get a ceasefire and the path to sustainable calm, as the phrase is said to be, what is your prognosis for what can happen if we do get there?
First of all, can everybody hear me okay? The audience? Okay, good. So first, thank you for having me. In late April, Israel presented to the Qatari and Egyptian mediators for delivery to Hamas a proposal for a ceasefire that would begin with the first phase with 30-some hostages coming out in return for Palestinian prisoners and at least 6 weeks of a ceasefire that would then begin negotiations on something, as you described it, a sustainable calm, so that it could be built into something more enduring. A lot of details in that proposal, specific elements that are about the hostages, are about Israeli military movements, are about the humanitarian surge that would accompany this, are about the capacity of civilians to be able to return to their homes. Hamas came back a few days ago with a counterproposal. Some elements mirror what the Israelis presented, some are different. Some of what they edited or added will be unacceptable to Israel, some may be acceptable. That's what negotiations are about. Those negotiations are ongoing as we speak in Cairo, and we'll have to see what comes out the other side. We believe, the United States believes, that there is a pathway to a deal here, that the two sides are close enough, that the outlines of this deal are clear enough, that they should do whatever is necessary to drive to get to that outcome. We'll stay in close touch with the Israelis on it. And we've told the Qataris and Egyptians, and frankly the whole world, that they've got to keep putting pressure on Hamas to say yes to something that ultimately gets to that ceasefire and ultimately to an end to this war. And every one of the hostages out, including the American citizens who are being held hostage in Gaza.
And so if we get a ceasefire, that should unlock a much longer-term solution in your mind.
Look, any ceasefire is almost by definition fragile, but we have said for some time now, and the president said this in the State of the Union, we are looking for a ceasefire and hostage deal that begins with a matter of weeks, but then is built into something enduring. That is what we are committed to seeking. We would like to see a pathway to that, and we believe there is a pathway to that. It's sitting there on the table in Cairo, and it just requires the two sides to push that final set of yards to get into the end zone.
Well, thank you for that. Let me make a hard pivot to the real focus of this conversation. And I want to start with what may seem like a kind of big, dumb, simple-minded question, but I think gets it in some ways the fundamental topic here, which we often lose sight of. This expo is called the AI Expo on National Competitiveness. It reflects, I think, a broad view in the foreign policy community that AI is both an arena for competition and a tool of competition, a means of competition. What exactly are we competing for? What do we mean when we say competition here?
Well, first, we want to make sure that the technologies that will define our future work for the United States and our allies and not against us, that they enhance our security and that they don't undermine it, and that they reflect our values and don't assault them. So basically, when we talk about competing, we talk about being on the cutting edge, the leading edge of the technology, so that we're also helping to shape the rules of the road and the applications of those technologies in ways that are consistent with our interests and our values and the interests and values of our allies and partners and the vision of the world that we would like to see. So at bottom, that means making the necessary investments here at home in an allied ecosystem so that we stay at the cutting edge. We are leading the world in terms of the development and pushing the frontier of AI in terms of frontier models, but then also in terms of the key applications of those models across the multiple realms of human endeavor.
So one of the most complicated, I imagine, for your job is how we integrate AI capabilities and tools into intelligence and military applications. The president issued an executive order on AI several months ago or late last year that talked about the development and deployment of these across a whole suite of areas. When you look specifically at the military and intel applications and the more kind of traditional national security areas, what are the biggest priorities and what are the challenges? What are the areas that present the biggest obstacles at this point?
So as you said, the president signed an executive order on artificial intelligence a few months ago, and we have been moving rapidly to hit every deadline on every page of that very lengthy document. One of the things coming out of the executive order was a directive that we in the National Security Council coordinate what's called a National Security Memorandum, an NSM, that essentially will govern or direct the deployment and direction of artificial intelligence in intelligence, military, and other security spheres. We're in process of doing that right now. We expect to have it done this summer, and that has the participation of DoD, of the intelligence community, the State Department, the Treasury Department, and of course, the National Security Council. Three things in particular that we're focused on. First, how do we use artificial intelligence ourselves in our intelligence and military enterprises? How do we incorporate the breakthroughs in artificial intelligence in a way that helps us take the massive amount of data and information that we collect as an intelligence community and put it to better use and work? How do we incorporate AI-enabled technologies in for our warfighters and for our overall defense enterprise? That's the first. Second, how do we defend against adversaries and competitors' use of artificial intelligence? How do you build deterrence? How do you build defense? How do you disrupt the ability of adversaries or competitors to develop AI capabilities that can threaten or harm the United States? And then the third area goes to this whole point about global norms. How does the United States stay on the front foot, whether it's through the UN General Assembly resolution that we spearheaded, or the G7 Hiroshima principles that we helped shape, or any of a number of other avenues where we are trying to help set the rules of the road globally for responsible uses of AI. And in this regard, I should point out that the American Department of Defense is the ultimate leader in terms of setting principles with respect to AI and warfare. And we want that to be true across the entire national security spectrum.
Lots to pick up on there, but let me linger on one other element of national power. You have been quite outspoken and quite eloquent and forceful as a national security advisor, of course, in the foreign policy world, on the domestic foundations of American power. You gave a remarkable speech about a year ago at Brookings, I believe, on the effects of trade and trade policies, international economics, on the foundations of power. When you look at AI and what it might mean for jobs and society, how do you think about the relationship between those effects and our competitiveness globally? And what can we do to shape how that plays out on the ground in a way that we, as you have said, failed to with past disruptions?
Look, AI promises to be the most powerful, impactful technology, perhaps for the next 100 years, perhaps the next 1,000 years. And that's true across every dimension of society, our economy, our defense, our national security, and our competitiveness, the heart of this conference. First, from my perspective, the need to ensure that what is a commercially driven, private sector-led, non-government ecosystem for the development of this technology, which is the first of the major disruptive security technologies that the US government really hasn't played a central role in a very long time, that there are safeguards and there is oversight of that technology so that it really does do more good than harm. That is a critical aspect of what we're trying to do, and that's at the heart of the president's executive order on artificial intelligence. It's at the heart of the voluntary commitments that we asked the leading AI companies to take on. But there's more work we're going to have to do on a bipartisan basis with the Hill on this, and that goes for uses of AI that are potentially dangerous in the bio or cyberspace, and it goes for harms that could come from AI that are economic or social in nature, whether it is the impacts it has on communities or industries or workers who are displaced, and how we make sure that there is a safety net for them. The social impacts of bias and disinformation and some of the other challenges that have been talked about during this conference. And then, how do we make sure that we're harnessing the massive opportunities that come from AI so that those opportunities don't just benefit the few, but benefit everybody, whether it's major breakthroughs in biotechnology and medicine, or breakthroughs in productivity and engineering, or scientific discovery. How do we make sure there is a public good aspect to the advent of AI and not merely a private gain aspect? These are profound and massive questions. Any one of the sentences I just uttered, we could spend the entire time unpacking and talking through how that all works. But I would just end where I began, that what makes it challenging to sit in government with this technology, unlike nuclear weapons or the space race, or even the internet, is that this is not coming out of government. It is coming out of private industry. And yet government has to play its appropriate and responsible role, given the massive and profound impact of this technology in every dimension, including those domestic focused dimensions that are at the heart of your question.
To what extent do you see the key private sector actors stepping up and becoming part of that process in the right way? And where do you see a need for more progress or new frameworks to really facilitate the kind of public-private cooperation that would be necessary?
I have to say that our engagement with the leading AI companies has been constructive. It's been intense, relentless, and it's not just us calling them, they call us too, to say, we want to be transparent, we want to be partners, we want to understand what your direction of travel is so that we can build that into our expectations and our planning. And the entire experience around the voluntary commitments, the experience around the executive order, was one in which, across the board, the biggest players, the medium-sized players, the smaller disruptive players, there is a considerable amount of energy around trying to be collaborative. But it's early days. And we're doing some of the low-hanging fruit and the easy stuff. When harder stuff comes along, obviously there'll be tensions, there'll be frictions, there'll be different perspectives. And so I don't want to sound Pollyannish or like there aren't going to be, hard conversations in the months ahead. But I think we're building a set of relationships and a mode of communication that will help us work through those hard issues in a way that works for everyone.
So I have shown great restraint by waiting until this long into the conversation to mention China, which is, of course, much of the focus of conversations here. When you look at China's AI development, how do you assess its progress, and what are the areas, if any, where you worry about the United States and our allies and partners losing an edge that we seem to have at the moment?
Well, first, I think that the United States is on the very cutting edge of AI right now, and the most advanced models right at the frontier are American models, and I'm very proud of that, and we can't rest on our laurels as a country. We have to keep doing what is necessary in terms of access to compute, access to energy, access to talent, to be able to stay at the cutting edge as we go forward. And China is going to do everything it can to race ahead itself. We obviously have a very different vision and value set when it comes to artificial intelligence and when it comes to these advanced technologies than China does. The thing that I, as National Security Advisor, am most concerned about is how AI ends up fitting into military modernization in ways that could harm the national security of the United States or our allies. And that is why we've imposed this small yard, high fence set of restrictions on semiconductors and the equipment to manufacture them, because we do not want to hand over capability that has a military nexus that could be used to harm us. And we'll continue to refine that as we go forward. The last thing I would say is we are not interested in holding back access to the API of advanced models like ChatGPT or things that have gone beyond ChatGPT. The reason you can't get ChatGPT in China is not because of the United States. It's because China has banned ChatGPT. So it will make its own determinations, but we are going to make a sharp distinction between the commercial and economic applications of artificial intelligence and the national security applications of artificial intelligence. And I focus my energy and our resources on the latter as we try to define a set of policies that are rigorous, that are narrowly tailored, and that we will continue to refine to ensure are effective to protect our national security.
So you use the phrase that you've used often, small yard, high fence. The complaint from the Chinese government, obviously, but also from some in industry in the United States and some outside observers is that that small yard is going to endlessly expand. And we see new kinds of technologies being incorporated, new controls on specific kinds of chips and other things. What is the limiting factor when you look at what should be in that small yard? Is there any way to safely say what will not fall within it? Is it, this is something going to be negotiated over time? How do we understand, how do we consider the possible land grab that is part of that small yard?
Well, look, this is one where we've actually really shown our homework. We're not doing this in a black box and then just presenting, here's 2 chips, 5 chips, whatever. We put out a set of regulations in October of 2022. We put out a set of updates in October of 2023. We have signaled we'll continue to update as technology advances and as we learn more over time. But in putting those out, we actually send them for notice and comment. We say, here's the parameters we're using to define what small yard high fence looks like, and then we invite reaction to that. And we have really focused it on capability thresholds. And we've really focused it on a very narrow set of AI chips. So the vast majority of chips on the market in the world are available to everybody, including to China. But we have done that around the basic proposition that for the very most advanced chips, which do have military applications, we're not going to allow PRC, a significant competitor of ours, to have access to them. And then when it comes to semiconductor manufacturing equipment and technology, we have similarly set out a very detailed set of parameters, very rigorous, thoughtful, deliberate, not haphazard, to say above a certain threshold of capability for producing the highest end chips, we are going to restrict that technology. And as we learn more about different uses of technology, different uses of chips, and how chips can be more effectively optimized now than they could be a year or 2 ago, we'll make small refinements, but it's not going to change the basic principle that has been at the heart of the controls over 2 years. And I think if you go take a hard look at what's on the books now, how it evolved from last year, I think it is hard to make the case that this is some massive sweeping thing that is covering the waterfront of advanced technology or advanced AI capability.
So if that's the yard, let's talk about the fence at risk of overstraining the analogy. How confident are you that there's not smuggling and other efforts to evade those controls that are meaningfully affecting Chinese abilities in terms of what they can get access to? And that could be smuggling. It could be efforts by private sector actors to modify things slightly in order to continue exporting to China. Do you feel confident those controls are working, or are we able to see that?
What I think is that any competitor of ours is going to look for opportunities to find the gaps or seams in any control we put in place. We built that into our thinking from the beginning. And so we have tried to design a structure that makes it difficult to evade our controls, but no system is foolproof. And this is an iterative process. We learn, they learn, we learn, they learn, and this is a constant work in progress where we are trying to ensure that our controls are maximally effective and that there can't be effective evasion, whether through shell companies or third countries, or you name the tools of the trade of trying to evade export controls and sanctions. I would say one other thing, which is it is clear to us that the PRC has also embarked upon a massive and relentless information campaign to basically say, this is futile. Resistance is futile. We will break these controls. We will make them ineffective. We're going to power through them. And I can't tell you the number of stories I read in the American press coming out of this effort that say, aha, this shows the control can't work. This shows the control can't work. That is an effort to essentially try to overwhelm the controls with a sense of inevitability. Fine, that's the sovereign right of the PRC to pursue that strategy. It's our sovereign right to say, we believe in these controls and we believe in our capacity to make them effective, and we're going to do the needful to make them effective. That is a process that we're embarked upon on a continuous basis, and something, like I said, that is a constant work in progress.
I think you just called me a useful idiot, but I won't take it personally. The other dimension of this in the U.S.-China dynamic is the shared interest, and think shared interest in preventing really damaging kinds of AI proliferation or escalation. One of the key achievements, I would say, of the meetings between President Biden and Xi Jinping in Woodside last November was to begin talks on AI, which I think was a surprise to many people. What do you hope to achieve in those talks, and what would represent a home run in that effort, to your mind?
I'll settle for a single to start.
Fair.
Or maybe leg out a double. A home run, I think, will take time to build towards. I mean, fundamentally, this is a transformational technology. The U.S. and China are the two leading players with respect to this technology. As I've said before, it presents huge opportunities, but also significant risks. We have an obligation as the two leaders in this area to manage those risks. And so what I see as success in this dialogue is, number one, can we come to a common understanding of what those risks are, or at least where we differ, understand the differences? Can we come up with some protocols or parameters for how to manage those risks effectively? And then can we establish and sustain a channel of communication so that if there is a significant problem or crisis down the road, we've built habits of cooperation and communication that could be useful in addressing that? That, for me, is what could be success in this space. That's not going to stop us from competing aggressively in this area or China competing aggressively. We're not sitting down together to build frontier models together. But what we are doing is, as each of us do our work, sitting together to say, as any two responsible stewards in this current geopolitical environment should do, how do we understand and try to reduce the overall level of risk that could come from this, that could be, catastrophic in its consequences if not managed well.
And in your interactions with Wang Yi, the president's interactions with Xi Jinping, do you get a sense that there is a responsible partner on the other side?
I think they are eager to have this conversation because they recognize that its absence is dangerous. And so I have not seen any hesitation or reluctance on their side to do it, quite the contrary. And we expect to have the first meeting here in very short order.
Turning to a somewhat different theater, it's been remarkable for, I think, anyone observing to watch the developments in technology on the battlefield in Ukraine over the last 2+ years. There was a moment a year or two ago when it seemed like Ukraine had the advantage in innovating in various ways, including when it came to drones and use of AI on the battlefield. Now it's a little bit murkier. As you've watched that conflict and worked on it very, very intensively over more than 2 years now, what do you take away about the future of conflict? What does it mean for what our own capabilities, how those need to evolve? What does it tell you about what we might see in a Taiwan scenario or something else? What are we learning from that?
So the way am a daily observer of the war in Ukraine and have thought a lot about this basic subject matter. And so for me, it comes down to speed, scale, and synergy. And I hate the word synergy, but it starts with an S. So what I really mean to say is integration, but SSI is not as good as SSS. So what do I mean by that? Speed, two things. One, this is an incredibly iterative back and forth. Ukraine comes up with the capability, Russia adapts to deal with that capability. Ukraine adapts to Russia's adaptation, and back and forth and back and forth. And that happens really fast, and it happens right there on the battlefield. Not in the lab, not in the Pentagon, not in a think tank. It's happening with operators in real time. So the speed with which the capacities are evolving and adjusting is breathtaking. Second aspect of speed is speed of acquisition and deployment. We cannot have 10-year-long lead times to get these capabilities to the battlefield. They have to get out there fast, much faster than traditional procurement processes would allow for, and much faster than traditional production processes would allow for. And there are big lessons in that for us in the United States. So that's on speed. On scale, a big part of this is one drone is good, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 drones is better. Having the sheer scale of capability to put at a given problem is a necessary feature of this. I think we used to think of technology as being able to reduce scale rather than expand it. In fact, the way that I'm seeing the interaction between AI, high tech, and the basic technologies of warfare is just throwing a ton at the enemy is with as much survivability as possible is the best way to have good effect. And then third, on synergy, or what I call integration, it requires an entirely different theory of integration between the technology community and the private sector and militaries. Not your traditional defense prime to Pentagon relationship, something that's a much more fluid ecosystem, that is more distributed, that is more adaptable, flexible, and that's going to require us building entirely new modes and habits. And we're starting to see that these learnings already filter their way back into the way the DoD, the intelligence community, others are operating, having gained some of this knowledge out of supporting Ukraine in its fight for its survival and its sovereignty and territorial integrity. But that's how I see the landscape.
This is one other threat that will be front of mind for, I'm sure, you and many others heading towards the election, and that's disinformation, both from adversaries and others. AI is, in obvious ways, supercharging that. What are we doing to defend against it, and what do you worry about as you look at not just the next 6 months, but the future of our political discourse in this country and globally?
Look, I mean, this is a profound problem to which we do not have simple solutions, because combining the capacity of artificial intelligence with the intent of state and non-state actors to use disinformation at scale to disrupt democracies, to advance propaganda, to shape perception in the world. This is one of the most profound geopolitical trends of our time. And I would argue that right now, offense is beating defense big time. So the question for us is, do the same types of technological capabilities that AI brings to the table help us enhance the defense in important ways? And part of that national security memorandum that I talked about will try to get after this problem. How you can better and more effectively identify and then effectively counter disinformation. The voluntary commitments that the major AI companies have signed up to do get at this issue in some respects, issues like watermarking, trying to get at deepfakes and so forth. But the voluntary commitments are a start. They recognize the problem and begin to start offering principles for solutions. But the implementation of those principles is going to require a constant iteration. And much like on the battlefield in Ukraine, it's iteration and adaptation on both sides. The same thing is going to have to be true with the offense and defense of disinformation.
But it's such a vast question that it's hard to even know how to begin to think about it. But the proliferation of this technology, the U.S.-China dynamic seems straightforward by comparison with thinking about proliferation to the full suite of actors, and the geopolitical consequences of that just seem hard to fathom for even people sitting and writing outside, let alone for someone sitting in your job.
Look, it's a massive democratization of both. I speak from the darker side of this as National Security Advisor. I was going to say a massive democratization of dangerous technology. I'm not saying AI is inherently dangerous. It's inherently both good and bad. But from where I sit, the thing I worry about is the democratization of dangerous technology. How you can deliver an explosive punch at distance with precision, how you can use AI models for a range of risks that have been talked about on this stage, from cyber to bio, and not just nation states, but much less grandiose actors. These are very concerning things. They require substantial work on safeguards, particularly of frontier models. That is something we are very focused on. And I would add to that, it's not just about putting safeguards in the models themselves, which is critical to ensure they cannot be misused by actors out in the world. It's about protecting those models on a cyber basis from being outright stolen, which is a real concern of mine, that a hacker at a keyboard somewhere could get their hands on GPT, whatever number it is. This is something that, requires a collaboration between the US government and private industry to harden cyber defenses so that it is harder for these things to get proliferated in ways where the safeguards could be stripped away and they could be used for all kinds of harm.
Let me try to shift this to a slightly more optimistic note as we head towards the end of the conversation. And it's striking that the U.S. advantage in AI and among American companies is a source of great attractive power. And you look at the Middle East, for example, as a place where a bunch of countries that have been, not especially loyal in terms of their partnerships with us and have been interested in building relationships with some of our adversaries are suddenly very interested in something that we have to offer. What does that mean in terms of what we can do with our own power? Does it open up opportunities in the Gulf, for example, where you have very intense interest from the Saudis and Emiratis and others in technologies that are here in the United States?
In my view, one of the reasons it matters to be ahead in the actual tech is that's actually the way that you stay ahead in terms of shaping the rules and norms and the ecosystem governing AI globally. And so the fact that the United States has NVIDIA and OpenAI and Anthropic and Google and Meta and Microsoft and then all the smaller players that are contributing so much in this space, that healthy, vibrant ecosystem that's keeping us at the cutting edge is also making the rest of the world, including countries in the Middle East, say, I want to be a part of that. And that gives us the opportunity to say, being a part of our ecosystem means being a part of a set of norms and values that make this technology work on behalf of a free, open, stable world order, as opposed to a darker vision that might be coming from some of our competitors. So we got to sustain the leadership on the tech to sustain the leadership and, as you say, the attractive power of the American technology ecosystem for countries around the world, including countries in the Middle East. The last thing I will say is this is America at its best. We have a history of this, of being the country that others want to be associated with, want to partner with, want to follow, because we are on the cutting edge. We are the ones who can offer up the greatest advances and breakthroughs in science and technology, and we just got to stay at it. And we, the US government, have to be a good partner in that, first by making the investments in our in innovation and industrial base here, so we have the foundation and the reservoir necessary to stay on the cutting edge. Second, by helping facilitate access to the compute, the power, the people necessary to continue to stay on the cutting edge. And then third, to help shape those rules and norms in ways that don't unduly restrict, but also channel the work of this technology in healthy and positive directions. That's the work that we have ongoing. The challenge is government tends to move at a certain speed. This technology is moving at a speed multiple times X that. And so we have to get better, smarter, faster than we have historically been. And I think the points we put on the board with the EO, what we're doing on the NSM, the voluntary commitments, all of that has happened much more rapidly than typical government. And we just have to stay on our front foot.
If you polled people in this room, most of them know a lot more about the technology than I do, and I imagine you do, with no offense. There'd be an extremely wide range of predictions about what this means and what the risks are and what the timelines are. It seems extremely difficult to be in your job making policy, given just the incredible range of possible outcomes and paces of those outcomes that even very smart people are grappling with.
I mean, the one thing I have learned since taking this job in January of 2021 is every timeline that somebody has presented since then has been beaten. Things are happening faster than was predicted, not slower. That can always change. But I think we have to operate on the basis that whatever the current prediction is for the next kind of major jump up the slope and the next one, that's going to happen extremely rapidly. And so we've got to be moving at the speed of relevance, and the speed of relevance right now is lightning fast. The other thing that's hard is for us to really understand or wrap our heads around all of the implications of this, what this actually will look like and mean as we go forward. And from 1 year ago to today, think about the great education that those of us who aren't technology experts have gotten. Think about now to 1 year from now. That requires a whole different mindset for how government comes at this issue than really anything that we have encountered before. Because as I said, we haven't had a technology like this with this profound of implications that government hasn't had some hand in quite a long time. And so it's requiring an entirely different set of muscles for us. And we're trying to exercise those muscles so that when we flex them, it's for good and not so bad.
That's a good note to end on. Thank you, Jake Sullivan, for doing this on an extremely busy day. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.